My name is Jack Weixel, and I manage global partnerships for something in Android that we call dedicated devices. I'll explain a little bit more about what that is, but for now you can think about that as anything that's not a smartphone. Right? So all the other use cases that we'll talk about, falls into that category. I want to have a discussion today about a couple of things. One, I want to talk about why we're placing in Android, why we're placing a focus on enterprise use cases, how we're addressing those use cases, what some of the trends in the industry that we've seen regarding the use of mobile operating systems, and give you some examples. So actual customer use cases. That's my favorite part. And what I hope to do is walk through, give some examples. We'll open up the floor to questions afterwards in case you have some observations, questions, and obviously happy to talk more about that. So I'm going to start out with a couple of numbers. There's no Google presentation that can be done without numbers to start things off with. Some of those numbers you may already know. For example, there's 2.3 billion monthly active users on Android. Every month, 2.3 billion devices that are used that are GMS devices. That's Google Mobile Services. You can think of that as Play services, everything they're used to in a mobile phone. I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail why this is important, but I want to talk first off about what that scale is. Just to give you an indication, no other operating system has ever shipped 2.3 billion copies. Right? And that's what we have monthly active users. That has a lot of implications as to what we have to do for the ecosystem and how we need to build it. That also has implications about what we're doing in enterprise. A key to that is Google Play. Obviously, smartphones or enterprise use cases, enterprise devices require the ability to install, manage, update various applications on a device. And it's just massive. There's about 94 billion apps were down. 94 billion apps were down over the last year. We see about 8 billion installs every month. So if you think about that, in order to manage that and ensure security, ensure usability, ensure consistency, we've had to take all that into consideration as we're building out to support this ecosystem. And we're creating that ability to address this that you could take advantage of in enterprise, with your enterprise use cases. Now, one set of numbers you may not be aware of is the fact that there will be about 300 million Android phones that will ship for business use this year. That's just for business use. And we've broken down, because of how we address the market, into those that are personally liable, bring your own device, or something that's corporate owned. 227 million in personal liable and 60 million in corporate owned. Now, 78% of devices, 78% of all the devices shipped for business are Android devices. So that's a big why as to why we're building out what used to be considered kind of a consumer operating system. And quite frankly, we went to market initially focused on consumers until we saw a huge increase in the business market. And since Lollipop, we spent an awful lot of time building in capabilities to address enterprise use cases. Now, the reason that's important is prior to this point, there were lots of entrepreneurs creating ways to manage, deploy, utilize these devices. And they all ended up being proprietary and all ended up fragmenting the marketplace. We recognized that that was contrary to everything else we did at Android, number one. It mentioned a bit about compatibility, ensuring usability, and so forth. If you have fragmentation like this, that hurts everybody across the ecosystem. So what we decided to do starting in Lollipop is really deliver in the platform the ability to manage devices in a consistent fashion. We can take a look and see work profile and fully managed. That's a scenario where fully managed, obviously the corporation owns the device. Work profile is where corporation owns a folder on your device. It's a separate user. Complete data separation, for those use cases. That's all I'm going to say about work profile, because that's not what this is about. But those are the two key pieces to the management capability. When we got to Marshmallow, that's when we started really focusing more on the enterprise use cases that were different from a smartphone. So we introduced lock task mode, the ability to set devices up more easily in kiosk mode, so you can deploy business use cases, something that might be unattended, something that will be different than a smartphone scenario. And we've continued all through these next couple of releases, more and more capabilities that were addressed, that simply address the enterprise use cases, including being able to allow multiple shifts for being able to log into a device more easily. Instead of having to manage all of that software in a very awkward fashion, we allow you to sign in and sign out with P with these various devices. That'll apply to some of the use cases I'll talk about in rugged, as well as any of the public-facing multi-user sessions that we talk about. The reason I'm pointing all this out is if you're looking at an enterprise use case and you're trying to figure out how to deploy all the applications that you want, you don't have to build that capability. We've got it addressed in the platform. You can focus on what's the value add instead of just the base capability. Now, underlying all of this, the elephant in the room, by the way, with a lot of discussions I had early on when I joined the Android team was security. And this perception that Android was less secure than other operating systems. That's sort of been job number one at Android, making sure that we address that through security updates, other capabilities that we do that I'll touch on in just a second. But the pace of security innovation has been massive. In fact, so much so that Gartner tells us that as of Oreo, we actually surpassed what they were seeing in iOS, which was typically considered a more secure operating system than Android. So the pace has been huge. It's not that others haven't been innovating as well. We've just focused so much on this. It's just insane. So if you're looking at an enterprise device, there's no scenario where security is more important than in this piece. And that's been a huge focus of ours. And why does this matter? The reason all this matters, obviously, is that a couple of statistics that we've seen that have been presented to us from various analysts are the fact that 78% of business leaders, just a couple of numbers. This is Google, so I've got to give you some numbers. 78% of business leaders expect their operations to be a digital business in the next few years. If you take a look at the chart, you already know this, but if you take a look at the chart in terms of the growth of these mobile devices, it's insane in terms of how quickly that's growing. The one that I always like to point to is 90% of IT decision makers see enterprise mobility as a critical function for customer engagement, experience, and so forth. I think the more important factor that's behind this is probably 10% of them have to consider maybe in a year or so what they're going to do with their next job. Quite frankly, it's gotten to the point where you need to be focused on this type of thing, or you need to be focused on something else that may be future employment. Innovators across the industry we're seeing are turning to Android. Some of the things we'll talk about, by the way, are point of sale and kiosk capability. And these are, and again, I know you all have copies of this presentation. You will receive copies of the presentation, so you can look up some of these charts that I'll display here. But the growth in kiosk, if you've walked into an airport lately, right, or a fast food store, or just about anywhere, you've actually seen in terms of growth, what's been happening in this marketplace. The point of sale scenario is going to be is going to undergo a huge transformation over the next couple of years. It's already happening with various restaurants you've probably walked into, various hotels, resorts, and so forth. We're seeing an increasing move to Android through all of that. So we need to be able to support that and reduce the fragmentation that we talked about earlier with some of the knowledge worker scenarios in this area before it actually happens. So just to give you an idea, on the far left are the two scenarios that we started this whole journey with. That's the knowledge worker devices, we refer to them, handsets and tablets, just accessing email, corporate data, and so forth. What we're increasingly focusing on, my main objective, is all of these other types of devices. And we started with the rugged devices, for a simple reason. They most approached or looked like your handsets, right? If you're familiar with the Zebras, the Honeywells, and so forth, a lot of those devices look like your handset. They're ruggedized. They have other capabilities and accessories that people use to do their jobs, but they look like a smartphone. And we used close cooperation with these vendors to be able to build into the platform the way to address other things, such as, for example, in a scanner in the rugged device, if you're a point-of-sale system, there are other peripherals you have to connect to. And the ability to manage all of this, again, going back to the fact that as you look at these use cases, you want to focus on software and the value add and deliverable. We need to be able to address everything else underneath, from security to management and so forth. So what we really want to do at the end of the day is allow our partners to deliver to their customers devices for any user, no matter what they're doing. And some of the particular verticals or areas that we see huge growth in, for example, in retail, as well as hospitality. We'll go into a couple of retail use cases in a little bit. But you're here at Google Cloud, and when you think of a customer journey, or if you think of your operation of your store, from the time something hits your dock in the warehouse, the way it travels through inventory, is delivered to users at the end of the day, gets replenished. These are all ripe opportunities for a cloud mobile scenario to be able to improve processes, insight into what's happening, and customer experience at the end of the day. Hospitality, we'll talk a little bit in more detail as we get a little further, but the idea of being able to interact with your guests, your customers in better ways throughout whatever the property might be can be a huge competitive advantage for you. And we're working right now on how to even go beyond what we've done in the GMS scenario to be able to improve this to a great extent. Now, it's not like people aren't building, and some of you in the room may already be building some applications or capabilities to address these use cases, but what this started at was in what we refer to as AOSP. That's the Android Open Software Platform. Sorry, Android Open Source Platform. The difference when I refer to GMS versus AOSP, anybody can do anything they want with AOSP. You can build something. Of course, you have to, we deliver a lot of things in the platform, but you have to build your own ways to manage the device, deliver applications, so on and so forth. What we wanted to do with GMS, with Play Service, the objective is not to get you to take devices that have search on it, right, or Gmail. I mean, you could. There could be use cases for something like that. Certainly maps in some areas we'll talk about. But really, it's Play Services. When we go back to that slide I talked about, with all those applications that gets downloaded and think of having to update those and address those, if we leverage that to be able to deploy these applications and update applications to your devices, that makes your life a whole lot easier, as well as being able to utilize all the APIs to secure and manage those devices as well. Everything we've built into what we call GMS Core, and that's the Play Services underneath to be able to support this. And some key pieces within that story are the ability to enhance the security, be able to deploy in a very quick and easy way, and utilize something we call Managed Play. So enhanced security, just to give you an idea, when we talk about these types of GMS devices, all devices that have Play Services on them go through an approval process. So we understand what the fingerprint is, what the image looks like, and we can devise tests that are done at machine speed, constantly changing, so that we can tell even, not just the fact that we do all the scanning of apps and make sure that there isn't potentially harmful applications being delivered to your device. We can tell afterwards when a device is deployed whether it's been rooted, whether it's been tampered with, whether it's still secure, whether there are problems with it. We can continue to secure those devices even after the application has been deployed, the device is deployed, and so forth. Zero-touch bulk enrollment is the capability to, in a summary fashion, be able to take a device out of the box, turn it on, sign in, and everything happens, automatically. Your EMM gets attached to it, your applications get downloaded, gets booted in the fashion that you expect it to be done. All of that without user interaction. We make it very easy to be able to deploy this. So again, when you're talking in an enterprise sense, the scale of thousands of devices in multiple locations, the ability to take advantage of this and deploy apps is critical. Manage Google Play. Again, I want to come back to the point that when I talk about Google Play, a lot of times people think of consumer apps, right? You're going to download Candy Crush or whatever onto a device. Manage Google Play means the admin, the company, gets to decide exactly what's available on the device, exactly what the application store looks like, as a matter of fact. You can open it up to the world. You can publish only private apps. You can publish private apps only to your devices. You can allow a mix, whatever you decide to do. And by the way, you can make it invisible to the user and just deliver these to the devices in a time fashion that you choose and with complete control over what's happening. So all of this is an enterprise focus, utilizing that platform, but doing it in such a way that you have complete control. This is not an open to Google, open to the world type of scenario. And by the way, one of the things I always get asked about is what is Google looking at on my devices? A key thing with Manage Google Play is it's a device account. It's not a user account. So we alleviate the concern over people wondering what's made available, what's viewed, what's seen, and so forth. Now, because of all this work that we've done, when we take a look at the percentage of devices that are free of potentially harmful apps, 99.99% of devices. And the two bars we have here, the green one is one that is not using Google Play only. to deploy apps. You know, the blue one is using Google Play only to go ahead and do that. The alternative, by the way, to do this is to sideload an app. To sideload an app, you have to open up your device to install applications from unknown sources and utilize something called a device administrator API, which we're deprecating, by the way. This opens up security holes that did not exist in Android. And going back to what I talked about earlier, that was a key reason we had to close that off and deliver an alternative so that you can actually have this kind of result. And I'll tell you what, the green, because of all the capabilities that we built into Android to improve security, you see even the green going down dramatically. But its worst point, 5.3% of devices. I imagine with a lot of your desktops, you'd be pretty happy with potentially only 5.3% of those devices. But we're not happy with that. We want 0.01%. And that's what we get at the end of the day with taking advantage of this kind of platform. So it's not just making it easy, it's not making it consistent, it's actually making it rock solid secure. And I talked about rugged. That was the first group to actually engage with us from the enterprise scenario. We've seen a huge trend. This is reported to us by partners and analysts in terms of where the market is going. And you think about it, these types of devices, this comes from an industry where people want to lock things off from exposure to the internet because they want to secure the device, right? So in this marketplace, when people are accepting Android and moving to Android, we're winning the game because we're delivering results that we expect to do. So let me talk about a couple of things. I want to start, by the way, there's a couple of videos. There's only a couple that I'll actually play. These videos, you can go to android.com/enterprise and take a look and see what the actual use cases are. And I encourage you to do so because they're pretty interesting, the innovation, what people are doing in these scenarios. But an example of what we're talking about here, and this is Walmart, and they're using Zebra devices. And I believe SAP is their cloud application that they're delivering. Obviously, you're familiar with Walmart. They've got about 2 million employees. And what they were faced with a scenario where they wanted to be able to give one device to their associates to do a number of different things. And they will look up prices. They will actually scan and take a look at inventory, what's available. And in the same device, they'll be able to say, OK, I'm out of this product. When's my delivery date? Right? They can see that on the device. They can take a look and see when they have ordered. They can start to make decisions based on what trends have been. Not just the device, but from the corporate standpoint, by connecting this to, obviously, a cloud app, to be able to make better decisions about when they're going to order, what they're going to do, improving customer journeys, and so forth. This is the type of back-to-front scenario that we've seen repeatedly in this industry, and this is a really good example of it. What I love about this, though, is I've seen this come up in a number of different use cases where someone unsolicited will say, it works just like my smartphone. And if you think about it, when you're talking about doing a transformational change, transforming any business process, getting somebody to do something a little bit different, introducing a new product, the most difficult thing is getting somebody to accept it and be able to learn what to do differently than they had been before. Taking advantage of a platform where you get that reaction, it's just like my smartphone, that makes your job a whole lot easier. And that's why one of the reasons people will turn to Android to go ahead and do this. So from this perspective, it's a great use case to take a look and see how people are using these devices to be able to get a 360-degree view of everything that's happening in the enterprise. So what we've done to be able to support all of these activities is to be able to introduce a couple of key programs into the scenario. One is what we call Android Enterprise Recommended. We were constantly asked, what do you recommend for an enterprise to use? What types of devices? And this applies, as we eventually realized, not just to a particular phone that you're going to use for email, but across the board to rugged devices, to EMMs, everything is part of the ecosystem. And we built an Android Enterprise Recommended program to be able to ensure that you're going to have confidence as a customer in selecting a device, consistency in deployment, and making sure that it's current and up to date. We have requirements in terms of how quickly devices need to be upgraded, security updates delivered, and so forth. So as well as making sure that they can be delivered and deployed with zero touch in all the ways that we expect to do. It's going to look and feel the same way when it's deployed. Obviously, all these capabilities are important from an Android Enterprise Recommended. But again, coming back to anything that you might be doing in your particular business, you can be comfortable in the fact that we've built the infrastructure and the capability, particularly if you choose some of these partners, to be able to deploy things in a way that makes a lot of sense and you can be very comfortable with. So just to give a quick view, from the rugged perspective, by the way, we started out with 5 OEMs that quickly expanded. There's still a few more that are waiting to be updated. So it's been a huge uptake. And one of the simple reasons is people are starting now to make choices on particular devices based on whether they're Android's enterprise recommended or not. Customers always want to be comfortable with what they're buying. Okay, so that's a little bit of the background on what we're doing and why we're doing it. But let's talk about some of these Android dedicated devices. And the rugged device we already talked about, but what we're doing is now seeing, as we talked about, more activity in point of sale, embedded devices, kiosk scenarios. And when you think about this and all the capabilities that Google will bring, not just in terms of device in your scenario, one thing that I didn't mention a couple of slides back that I'll bring up now as we talk about this, because when you take a look at this, when kiosks and point of sale, retail is a great vertical. And when you think back to what you do, particularly in the retail segment, in all aspects of your business, one of the things I mentioned a few slides back is other Google technologies. One key is augmented reality. So imagine, if you will, a scenario where you could take a device and you are in a warehouse to be able to walk through and use augmented reality for anyone that wants to pick something to be able to go immediately to that shelf, or to be able to walk to a scenario where you're fixing a component and to be able to have overlaid not only instructions on what to fix, maybe it's actually because you've already captured information about which device is failing, what needs to be done and so forth. The device can actually lead you to understand what you need to do and which device needs to be replaced. All of which, by the way, exists right now. And those are use cases people are delivering. So you can build that type of capability into your scenario. So how are some of the dedicated devices being used? And full disclosure, this particular slide is actually an example, but I stole it from the Chrome guys because this was actually a Chrome deployment. You can do the same thing in Android. What you may not be aware of is there are proximity APIs in all these devices. So if you have an application, maybe you're a retailer, and you have an application that might be a loyalty app, and someone's actually opted in to be able to get offers or notices from you, as they walk by a particular display, that could be geared to be able to deliver to them either content, offers, and so forth that would apply to that individual. So these are the types of things that actually, if it's done in the right way, can be really compelling in a user experience. So Chronopost is a delivery company based in Paris, similar to FedEx, UPS, and so forth. And a while back, they decided that they needed to revamp their fleet. They're delivering about 1 million packages a day, and they saw a lot of inefficiencies throughout the whole scenario, from being able to track what devices are picked up to scheduling routes and so forth. What they opted to do is they worked with a partner, Zebra, and one of our EMM partners to be able to design a system whereby they would be able to have a driver, number one, when he walks in the morning, to be able to pick a device up, drop it into his truck or her truck, and it's got the map laid out. It's got all its delivery schedule already set up for him. He just has to follow, what the device is telling him to do, and that's all driven by an application that understands, what are the packages, what are the locations, what is traffic in the area, other disruptions to a particular route, and they use Google Maps to do a lot of this, in addition to what they're doing on the device in their own application. And if you're not aware, there are APIs that you can build other capabilities into Google Maps. So for example, if you're a delivery driver, maybe you have a particular address, but the loading dock happens to be around the corner on another physical address, or it might be a little bit difficult to get to that particular scenario. You can build that into the app so that when the driver is approaching his destination, that driver is going to the correct area, navigating with the right street, makes it a much more efficient capability to be able to deliver those devices. So it's been a huge success in their deployment, and not only in terms of helping the drivers, but as they're capturing all the information about what's happening, what are the routes, what are the failures in the trucks, and so forth. There's loads of information that produce analytics that they can use to dictate and determine how they want to make changes and what they want to deploy in going forward. Marks and Spencer, you may be familiar with, a big retailer in the UK. They worked with a partner, Honeywell, to say, you know what, we want to build a device of the future. What the associates were doing, they described doing 5 or 6 devices. One is to check a price. And one is to see what's in the inventory. One is to understand, customers' order status, so on and so forth. They decided they would take one device, and instead of having all these different devices do things, they would have one device that has apps to run all these different capabilities. They spent a lot of time actually working with their associates to understand how they do their daily job, what's problems, what's headaches, and so forth. And they rolled this about a year ago, out to their customers. And it's really interesting when you listen to the video. The woman that was actually heading this up says this is, I don't know how long she'd been at Marks & Spencer, but this is probably the most successful rollout that they ever had. You listen to some of the associates talking about how great it is to have this device in their pocket that makes their lives that much easier. What it results in at the end of the day, they have statistics that they talk about in the video, where it improved customer satisfaction as well as employee satisfaction to a marked degree, and it all can be traced to when they rolled this program out. So there's hard data in terms of how this makes an actual difference, not just to your customers at the end of the day, but the employees as well. Most of you are probably familiar with Pitney Bowes, postage meter company. Pitney Bowes a while back decided that, you know what, we need to change our focus a little bit. We need to incorporate some of the new mobile capabilities. We need to deliver things to our customers in a different way. We want to deliver capabilities that they just don't have today. So what they did is they worked with us. They built a postage meter that has an embedded 7-inch tablet in it. And what they deliver to their users, I'm not sure if you're familiar with their background, but all these are regulated. So if you find a postage meter in a customer account, nobody owns it. That's all managed by Pitney Bowes. But what they do is they deliver a web store so that the customers can buy certain services, go well beyond weighing a package and making a delivery. Part of that is an application that would do the calculation for the customer to say, listen, here's a package going to X location, it's Y weight, use FedEx or use UPS, or they choose the most efficient or least expensive way to go ahead and deliver that package. There are other capabilities that people would use on a daily basis that could be used on this device, ranging from things like inventory, timesheets, and so forth. So a device that you think of as very simple, you weigh a package, you ship it, can actually be changed and used to be able to deliver capabilities to end users that previously you wouldn't be able to deliver. So MyCab is a company that's based in the Philippines, and they have a ride-sharing application. They're taking, I'm sure a lot of people in this room are familiar with Lyft or Uber, and what you get with your app to be able to rate, understand who's coming to get you, what the reality is. So imagine taking that type of capability, and what they did was they applied that to the taxi cab industry. So it's all taxi cabs as opposed to Uber or Lyft, but what they have is, you can think of 3 devices. One is the driver's device that sits in the front of the cab, and it's generally a smartphone type of form factor that allows them to get new customers, understand what the route is to the customer destination, and so forth. A device that's more tablet-sized is in the back seat, and that's used to do everything from display entertainment. They have some ads capabilities. They allow the customer to pay on that device. And of course, that's all connected via an app to the customer's device. So all of this is tied together. And when you think about this, it sounds kind of simple. It's a taxi cab app. It allows you to understand that who your driver is going to be. You get in the right cab. It's going to be well maintained and so forth. But think about it. They're using these devices to make their payment, right? So they have to be absolutely secure. It's not just a matter of making it available. Absolutely secure, and it has to work. Because if it's not working, they don't take payments, and everything falls apart. So this is kind of an innovative way of taking what we've learned in other areas, applying it to an existing business to kind of transform and make it more up-to-date in terms of what customers expect. And I want to play a short clip here. in terms of what the customer is looking for and what they saw as advantages about the platform as well as the partners they were working with. The key piece that they wanted to talk about, and again, this is on the website, so you can go and listen to them tell it in their words, but they've got thousands of devices that are deployed, and there's new cabs coming online and so forth. They have to do this remotely. They have to be able to do it easily. They have to do it in an automated fashion. They can't send someone out to all these different locations to be able to set it up and deploy the devices. All of this is managed by the platform that's built into Android Play services. And of course, as I mentioned, security is absolutely critical. So they talk a little bit in detail in the presentation as to why they chose that and what the impact was. So Pingo is, anybody here from the UK, by the way? No? Okay. Pingo is a company based in London that goes to restaurants and delivers a service whereby at the end of a meal, they deliver a folder along with your bill that includes a device. It looks like a 5.5-inch smartphone. It's not a smartphone. It's actually running one app, and that app is to be able to rate your experience, to be able to rate how the server was, cleanliness of the restaurant, how the food was, the different dishes and so forth. Of course, it's got all the detail because it's tied to the order that was delivered. And they've had unbelievable response from customers in terms of rating this. Everybody seems to want to go ahead and rate the app. And what's important about it is not only can they get it's kind of TripAdvisor type scenario or Yelp and so forth, ratings of that particular restaurant that they can publish, they can advertise and so forth, but they get really critical information about what's happening across all of their enterprise. It could be a small restaurant chain of 3 different locations, but if one dish is great at 2 of them and really lousy at one, or service is the same way, it's important to know that, right? It's important to get that kind of information. There's loads of other more detail that you can get out of this type of application. And when you think about that and you're thinking of various applications that matter to your particular industry, that type of analytical approach and data gathering would be critical in terms of what you can actually deliver. So as far as use cases, I'm going to close with the last one. This is actually my favorite. And this is, I had to have it rhyme, right? So it's inspiration, innovation, and celebration at the end of the day. But the point I want to make here is if you're looking at enterprise use cases and you're looking at what you want to do, obviously there's a scenario that you think can be improved or that you can think can be deliver capabilities that's not previously done. The important thing is to focus on what is that inspiration, what is that key use case? Because you can innovate using the platform to do some amazing things. You're going to celebrate at the end of the day. But hopefully the audio is going to work on this next one because I want to lead into it with an example of that inspiration. So Samantha and her friend, I'll give the voiceover here, traveled to Brazil a while ago on vacation. And the interesting thing about Brazil, if you know anything about Brazil, is nobody speaks English there. Nobody speaks anything but Portuguese, as a matter of fact. Okay, so a few people maybe, but what actually ended up happening is Samantha and a friend walked into various restaurants and would try to order and ask, does anybody speak English? And the answer, of course, was always no. And of course, not being able to communicate means that you can't order anything. So at the end of the day, what ended up happening is they walked out of 11 restaurants over the course of the time and were not able to order in any of them. They returned to the States, and by this time they were really hungry. Right? So the first thing they do is go to a restaurant to be able to order something, and the waiter brings them a menu, takes their order, understands what they want, walks up to the cash register, the point-of-sale device, enters it in, and at that point in time, the inspiration strikes. And so Samantha says to her friend, wouldn't it be great if I had a mobile tablet instead of a paper tablet, right? And I'd be able to understand what I want and order it. And by the way, maybe I speak English, maybe I'm in Brazil, but I would be able to order in English so that I understand what ends up happening in the kitchen is they get the order in whatever their local language is, and they'd be able to prepare the food, deliver it to the table, and everything is good. Yeah, everything is wonderful. So taking advantage of this type of mobile application can deliver a scenario where you've got less mistakes, faster service, efficient staff, and of course increase your revenue. And from that standpoint, that's Urban Translations was born. I've seen this once or twice. So what actually happens, this was a scenario of a restaurant. Urban Translations has done a lot of work, not only in restaurants, but hotels and resorts, to be able to deliver capabilities such that it's not just ordering food, right? Imagine when you walk into a hotel, and in your room is a particular device that ends up being your digital concierge. And maybe you're ordering food in a particular location, maybe you're asking for certain services, maybe you want to find out locations to go to be able to communicate in your own language, and to be able to have that seamless and allow us to interact. It obviously helps the customer, but it helps the staff as well. And even if it's not a scenario where you have to do a translation, the ability to walk in and have a kiosk just in a Marriott down the street, for example. So that, what's that? I don't even know. I think it's Enterprise car commercial, right? Where the guy says, well, I don't have to talk to somebody unless I want to, and I don't want to. I'm kind of that guy, by the way. So the idea to be able to just interact with the device and get what you want is kind of appealing to me. So these are the types of things that even on something as simple as you can't find someone to take your order or talk to you can lead to this inspiration that allows you to focus on new innovative scenarios. So the key at the end of the day, innovate, right? We've got a platform that would allow you to do it. Multiple form factors, multiple sizes, multiple price points. All of these things exist in the Android scenario. These are devices that you can use. You can buy them off the shelf. There are companies that will work with you to private label devices. Regardless of what that form factor happens to be, we can help connect you with those so that you can build these devices that can be anything from a kiosk to an order system and so forth. At the end of the day, yes, you're getting productive employees. You're really getting happy customers. But you're delivering something that makes your business succeed and thrive. And that's the type of thing that we want to deliver with Android. We want to help you do. So I'd encourage you to take a look at this. I want to work with you. So if we can help you do some of this, I'd be more than happy to engage myself or some of the team members to actually deliver some of this.